How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Got a request that came our way. It's about dealing with a lazy supervisor. I've covered this a few times, just can't find the videos. So that means it's a good time to go ahead and redo it and maybe add some more insight. Today, my guest is going to be Joe Pomponio. I think it's a great topic. The person that recommended it had just gotten done watching a video on dealing with lazy staff or frontline staff as a supervisor. So it's time to do the adverse. And because I can't find it in my library of 1,300 videos and change, almost at 1,400, I think it's time to now redo the topic. It's going to be interesting. We got about six tips. And guys, I may have said dealing with a lazy supervisor. I'm going to add something onto the side because as we were discussing this, it's not so much, I'm going to put lazy or unmotivated. The reason why is because we're going to judge them based on their ability to produce. So that may not always be because they are lazy. There could be many reasons why someone doesn't want to produce a desired outcome. So yes, I'm sure you could have people that are lazy, but you could definitely also have people that are unmotivated for whatever that reason could be. So basically, you could have someone that's overly friendly with an inmate. Doesn't mean that that supervisor is lazy. It just means that they're unmotivated because they're not doing the right thing. So again, I wanted to make sure that we look at it from a failure to produce. So again, all because you're lazy, that doesn't always mean that falls into every time a supervisor doesn't produce the desired or needed outcome. So I think in this dialogue, it's going to be good because it's going to cover a few perspectives. Now, before I bring Joe on, I just want to go ahead and go over our sponsors, if you guys don't mind. First sponsor is American Military University. If you guys get a chance, you're looking to have a degree, seek higher education, please check out American Military University. It's a great online school, very supportive of what we do in corrections, very supportive of what we do here on Tier Talk. And again, if you're looking to bring experience into the classroom, please check out American Military University. Also, Inmate Manipulation Decoded is now available. This book is doing great. It's available on Amazon. The link to that is in the description. This book is used for training all across the country right now. I'm selling a good amount of copies a day. I'm happy it's getting the message out there, and hopefully it's saving careers. So for people that have invested it or shared the book, thank you. It is much appreciated. It was written to fill that gap, and it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. So that's pretty awesome. And we also have now my most recent book, which you can see back there, getting revamped, getting republished. It's going to be published by this company here, Blue 360 Media. It's the #1 publisher for law enforcement books. I expect to have it out within a few months. I'll let you guys know when it gets released. But if you guys want to check out the other law enforcement books that they offer, from legal codes to specific books of the trade, specifically for law enforcement. So it's great to see corrections, the corrections profession in there as well. Thank you for that, Blue 360 Media. Go check out their library. I have a link to their website in the description. Again, it's Blue 360 Media, and the link to their website is in the description. All right, let me get Joe on. Joe, man. Hey, Joe, looking good. Hair looks good for early morning.
Yeah, just a little. It's getting grayer by the day.
I was talking about the hair on top of your head. So what's going on, Joe? It's been a while.
Man. Good morning from the sunny, preheating state of Texas. How are you, brother?
Good, brother. You mind introducing yourself and tell us how things been?
Absolutely. My name's Joe Pomponio. I am retired from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice as a lieutenant with 29 years and 6 months and some change, and currently working for our local sheriff's department in the jail division and having a blast.
Right. And by the way, Joe, it's always good to have you. I know your schedule's a little bit different now. But if I may, I thought this was an interesting topic. We haven't done it for quite some time. So I thought that this would be something that we could revisit. And real quick, you mentioned something at the very beginning before we started the show that I thought would be great just to kind of explain real quick. When we talk about dealing with a lazy or unmotivated supervisor, you mentioned something right off the bat. Hey, Gan, from what perspective? Frontline or from management's perspective? Where do you feel the difference is with that perspective?
Well, I mean, like I said, giving us perspective from the front lines point of view, their view of a lazy supervisor is going to differ from the administrative side. It's all about the production, and it's all about the outcome. Are we seeing the supervisor performing their job, duties the way they should be? From the administrative side, I'm sure they're looking at the culture of the shift. They're looking at the productivity of the shift. They're looking at the harmony of the shift. And, from the CO side, they're looking at, am I getting support from my supervisors? Are they backing my play? Are they running our disciplinaries? If I could talk, the perspective of that lazy supervisor, is going to differ from either side.
Right. And I think that the difference comes from what are we looking to produce? What is the desired effect? Whether it's an individualized, I mean, sometimes someone that sees things from an individualized level may not understand the bigger picture of why a decision's made. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something that really does affect the culture, the dynamic, someone that, let's say from front line, the failure for this supervisor to keep this inmate accountable could be one thing. And then you also have maybe for management, the failure to keep staff accountable could be another. So, I mean, I've also seen people, whether unmotivated or lazy, I don't know, but people that are in higher positions. And when you're management, you basically just kind of want to give them what has to be done and let them figure out the how. Because you don't want to micromanage the how. You could tell them what and tell them why, but really leave the how to those supervisors. But then you get people that are in those higher positions, and we're going to get to it, so I don't want to go too far ahead. But in their effort to not make a decision, they want to be talked through every step. And as administration, you're like, hey, listen, I was just hoping that you as a supervisor would be able to kind of lay it out and go, because I'm looking to empower you. Plus, I mean, in some cases, you got people that are in management that haven't been at your level of expertise. So now, yes, I may be in a management position, but my job really is to facilitate your needs and not micromanaging your ability to be effective. So I think that sometimes is unique, because sometimes you have people that are in higher positions as administration, and people may think, well, they got to know everything. And it's like, no, we do lean, or we technically should lean on our department heads for advice, and then work with those department heads to be successful. So I kind of hate it when someone in that seat of expertise all of a sudden is asking for you to micromanage something that really is within their level of expertise. And then they kind of get mad when it's like, well, why don't you understand? It's like, hey, listen, I gave it to you. You are the expert, and I'm hoping that you can tell me what the solution is. And then what I can do is stand up for that solution. Once you've explained it to me, if there's any concerns, I'll have your back 100%. But again, I've always been taught, this is what I want. This is why we need it. So now we have an understanding. But Joe, tell me, what do you feel in your level of expertise? What's the best way to accomplish that? And that's how it should roll.
Absolutely.
And then again, and by the way, people say, oh, the liability. No, the liability is still shared, because I'm going to back the decision.
Absolutely.
So don't think that we're pushing the liability, because a good supervisor, a good administration, once Joe gives me the idea, I will put it on paper that I support Joe and those suggestions at this point. So Joe, let's go ahead. And if there's changes have to be made, we'll figure it out as we go. But that's where we stay connected. So again, Joe gives me the suggestions. I stay in support of those suggestions. And whether we lose or fail, I mean, whether we lose or win, we're in it together. That's the key. And I just wanted to make sure I love what you said. So it really depends on the perspective. So having said that, today's dialogue, we are going to focus on frontline's perspective of dealing with a lazy or an unmotivated supervisor. And again, when we say that, it's really just in the effort to produce whatever that desired outcome is. So we kind of already did this. First, let's define an unmotivated supervisor from a few different perspectives, which we did. And again, we basically said that it really based on the motivation behind why something is not being done. That may not always be lazy, right, Joe? Would you agree that sometimes things are not done, not because the supervisor is lazy, it's because they may not know that it has to be done.
Yeah.
Actually, we're going to go through the list anyway. But one is they could be afraid of conflict, which is very selfish. That doesn't mean they're lazy. They're just afraid of conflict, which is still not good. But you would agree, Joe, not every time a supervisor, if they don't produce, always has to deal with the fact that they're lazy, correct?
That's correct. I mean, when CEOs are in that frame of mind that my supervisor is lazy, it's not, and you said it right off the bat, it may not be just pure laziness. It may be unmotivation. And there may be several factors and reasons why they're unmotivated, that they may be feeling lack of support from above them. As far as defining the lazy supervisor, it's not, things aren't always as they seem. Sometimes there's a rhyme and a reason for the way things happen. And it's something that CEOs generally don't understand because they're trained to be so streamlined and so tunnel vision in their duties that they really don't understand their frontline supervision's responsibilities, outcomes, and what all is involved in policies and procedures. So it's generally not until the correctional officers step up to the supervision where they get that aha moment.
Yeah.
Especially that first step to sergeant, they're still in that CO frame of mind. So every decision they're making it because they're in that CO frame of mind, and the lieutenants kind of guide them and say, "Hey, man, you're a supervisor now. We can't do that, and this is the reason why."
Yep.
So laziness and unmotivation is not always clear to the perspective of the COs. Sometimes there's a reason for it, and sometimes there's not.
Yeah, and it's sad because it's tough because the outcome may be the same.
Correct.
And they both require different approaches. If I have someone that's lazy, that's going to be more of a disciplinary approach if need be. Where if I have someone that's unmotivated, I'm going to look at myself first, and then maybe there's something I can cultivate. Why is that person not motivated? And usually you can tell because the person that's unmotivated, you only know they're unmotivated because of how they've done their work before. And now all of a sudden they're not at that point. So of course, as a good supervisor, as a good manager, you check to, hey, what happened? You were at this level and now you're down. Is there anything I can do? Blah, blah, blah. But when you have someone that's lazy, I truly believe that, it's discovered. You can go back in the past and look at certain things to say, you know what, this person really was never a hard worker. It's just that they've been finally exposed as a supervisor as to how lazy they are, because now there's many people looking to that person for help and they're just not cutting through. So I think it is something that if you take the time and effort, that person's always not been producing. They just have found ways to kind of make it look that way. And guys, and that to me would be the main difference between someone that is not producing because they're lazy and someone that's not producing because they're unmotivated. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Yeah, because and you said it right. You hit the nail on the head that if you're lazy as a CO, you're definitely gonna be discovered as a lazy as a supervisor, and your work history and your ethics, your integrity, and all your core principles kind of come into play with that. So if your core principles weren't there as a CO, they're definitely not going to be there as a supervisor. A title change doesn't change the human intuition. Only the human can change their own intuition. So, and we got to face it. Sometimes people get promoted that don't necessarily should have been promoted, not because of their ethics, because of who they're associated with. And when that lazy supervisor is discovered, then the questions are asked later on down the road. Well, who the hell promoted this guy? Why the hell did he even get promoted to begin with? He's on shift. He's got a high he doesn't have a high retention rate. He's got a turnover rate higher than hell. All of those things get exposed once you make that first step into supervision. It's not about just showing up, assigning people to a post and hoping that the whole shift goes well. There's a lot of things in there that supervisors have to do in order to not portray laziness, and in order to motivate your staff, you have to be motivated. If you're not motivated,
that's an issue. And it's all, and also looking at how they justify. I know people that get so mad at the system and they swear, you know what, I'm just going to stop doing what I do, and they don't because it's not in them. They just have strong work ethic. So they talk a lot of shit and like, you know what, I'm done. But then they can't. It's in them. It's like, you know what? At the end of the day, I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for me. It's like, okay, but good. I still want that. Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
guilty of that too.
yeah.
If I had a nickel for every time I said fuck it, I could have retired 10 years earlier.
Yeah, yeah. It just becomes that automatic escape, but then automatically it's just something that's in you that it's like, you know what, I have to do it, and then it's good because at the end of the day, you're doing the job regardless of the outcome. Because at the end of the day, your job is always going to be to hold the inmate accountable and let the chips fall where they may. Sad to say, if you're not supported, it does suck. But don't let that get disenfranchised. And you'll find people that are very strong workers that no matter what happens in the outcome side, they're going to be persistent with their effort because it's not even a win a battle. It's just that's who they are. That's just who they are. They have to produce because in them, their value in the job that they do comes from their ability to produce regardless of the outcome. You know, I'm not worried about the outcome, Gangi. I'm still producing, and that's all I have control of. I have control of my efforts, and I will be damned if I'm going to allow the outcome to affect what it is that I find value in producing forward. And that does take a lot, guys. It does. It's not easily done, but I would recommend that. And that's going to kind of fall into what we're discussing. So, Russ, sorry. So, Joe, I'm good. Russ was texting me. He wanted to do
Russ
the
has
show.
got more hair than me.
Yeah, a little bit. Russ was texting. He wanted to do the show, but he's still in bed. Well, he's on California time. So,
Right.
What we're going to do first, I'll introduce the tip, Joe, if that's okay. And then maybe you could talk about it. And we're going to keep the discussion from the frontline perspective, but maybe once in a while, I'll pop in a little bit of a higher level perspective because if it can round out that discussion. But I thought Joe could go first. So, Joe, let's do this one, Joe. A supervisor that doesn't like paperwork, how could that affect frontline?
Oh, that can affect your front line numerous different ways. You know, we've all had those supervisors that didn't want to have a use of force 2 hours prior to the end of their shift because they don't want the paperwork. And in Texas, there's a lot of paperwork. Or you got the supervisors that you feel that don't want to process your disciplinaries. You know, we've all worked with those supervisors. And, you know, in dealing with them supervisors from a frontline staff, you know, don't just hold it in when you don't get your desired outcome or you see things didn't go down the way that you feel they should have. Best thing to do is to go talk to that supervisor and ask why. Sometimes there's a reason, especially on the disciplinary side. You know, you got, you know, we'll use an example. You have an offender who is in max custody, serving a life sentence. He's had so many disciplinaries that there's nothing, absolutely nothing left that you can take from him. He's already in a cell with no property. You know, he's maxed out. He can't go to rec, can't go to commissary, can't go to, you know, just he can't have visits, can't have telephone privileges, all of that. I mean, just totally maxed out. And you write a disciplinary, let's say he cussed you out and the disciplinary doesn't get processed. You know, a supervisor should at least come explain to you why that they're not processing that. Hey, look, you know, we can't process it because really it's a waste of time because he's already maxed out. There's nothing they're going to do about it other than put another number on his disciplinary history. You know, and at the same time, when a CO feels that something hasn't, you know, gone the way they thought it should have, you know, just kind of check with the supervisor. Say, hey, you know, I noticed that, you know, that disciplinary didn't get run, or we haven't processed the disciplinary yet. Is there a reason? You know, sometimes there's a reason, sometimes there's not. And sometimes you have them supervisors that just flat out don't like doing paperwork. It is what it is. It's the nature of the beast. And we all have those units that have those style supervisors. It's sad because, you know, when you don't back your staff when you can or when you should, you know, then you start lowering the morale on your shift just because you don't want to do the paperwork.
Yeah, and Joe, I love what you're saying because sometimes we even find, especially now more than ever, we got a lot of staff that's being mandatoried. And when they get mandatory, they're tired, they're exhausted. The supervisors are the same. They're tired, they're exhausted. And, you know, they're coming in. They don't want to do any extra work because they've already committed to the work that they feel is needed. Now they're mandatoried and, you know, now I got to do all this paperwork on a shift I'm not even supposed to be here on. And you know, it does add to that level of frustration. But the longer term is there is still someone from your staff that took the time to write something. So you're right. If there's something that can't be processed, please validate that. Go talk to the staff member, tell them what happened. Like, I mean, I dealt with it where you have inmates that are in the higher level restrictive units, so like the restorative housing units, and there are certain things that you have to write. There is no alternative regardless, but there are certain things that's like, hey, listen, the inmate just wants you to write it because he knows you're wasting your time with it, especially the like a cursing or some level of disrespect. I mean, I found in the higher level, more restrictive units where you have the inmates that are the jail within the jail, you want to run that unit less by pen and more by respect. So even the supervisor can cultivate that depending on what it is that you're writing. If you're writing a series of little things and upset that the inmate said F you today and the charge didn't stick or the charge was thrown out, the supervisor can also go back and say, hey, this is what happened. This is why it happened. And just to let you know, let's try to do things this way. Because at the end, these inmates, sometimes they actually want the charge so they can remain back there. When we're trying to put them out and get them moving, they'll do something so superficial towards the end so they can manipulate their stay in that restorative housing unit, which a lot of people don't realize. Most inmates want to stay there because they could get their single cell or whatever it is. It's more structured to some extent. But with that said, for a supervisor that's unmotivated with the paperwork, the only thing I could tell you at this point is don't let that disenfranchise you from doing what you need to do, which is holding that inmate accountable. If that's, let's say that's one of the main reasons, or noting a concern that should be noted and making sure that if you feel that this person isn't doing the paperwork and passing that, passing the buck up, then you could also go to your next level up. That and you don't want to do that, but if you feel that, hey, this is the second time I brought it up, the third time I brought it up, and no one's listening to me, I'm going to start bringing it up a notch and kind of go through the chain of command upwards. Now, mind you, we're giving you advice that may not always involve the union because not every facility or every state has unions. So I'm going to try to teach you, me and Joe are going to try to teach you how to do things through using yourself, being self-reliant. And the key why you're doing that is ultimately going to be for documentation. So again, in this part, and I think Joe would agree, this is not so much about the outcome or the end result. This is about how much effort you're going to put into it, because I will tell you where it could backfire, where if you get so connected to the outcome that you get disenfranchised and you decide not to do the paperwork when it was really needed, there's no justifying, the fact that nobody did anything with the paperwork months ago when you tried to do it. The point is to be very persistent with your effort and just don't give up at that immediate chain of command, because even if someone said, well, what happened when the sergeant said no, they weren't doing nothing with it? Well, at that point, it doesn't work. Could you have gone to a lieutenant? Could you have sent an email to this level up? They're going to try to pull it back on you. And you have to make sure that you've exhausted every level to the highest, so you could definitely stand tall and say, I did everything. When the sergeant didn't do nothing, I did it this way, and this way, and still nothing happened. You have to show that exhausted effort, right? Right, Joe?
Absolutely. I wanted to touch on, I was kind of minimal with our, the way things are here. In Texas, the average cost of running a minor infraction, a minor court case, is around $40 per charge. The average cost of a major infraction to run major court, which is normally done by a captain or above, is around $80 to $85 because of the fact that they have to get a counsel substitute and involved. So what we do, and at least what I would do, I would, take the disciplinary from the officer, have my sergeant go get a pre-hearing investigation statement from the offender and turn it in. And what they generally do with those style offenders, that we use for an example that's maxed out on everything, they would list it as unprosecuted. But on the good side, that unprosecuted charge still shows up on their conviction history for 180 days. So if for any reason, something major comes up and warrants any kind of classification committee action, they can still go back 180 days on their history and say, well, this dude's had 13 cases that were unprosecuted because he's already maxed out. And since his last major case, he's had 12 minor cases for disrespecting staff. So there are alternatives that we can do, in order to still get it listed. But, the key factor in that is to make sure you communicate with your staff. Don't be that style of supervisor that just takes a disciplinary from an officer and throws it away, and you don't explain why to the staff.
Right. And guys, I want to tell you, as we go through the tips, sometimes they can roll into each other because, again, we considered this supervisor lazy in regards to the paperwork. Sometimes they have to charge when you charge the inmate, the supervisor has to go and provide the charge to the inmate. And some of them could be afraid of conflict, or they could be so lazy that they just don't want to deal with the conflict. So just kind of keep it in line with dealing with a lazy supervisor who just doesn't want to take the time to deal with the conflict that's needed when they serve the charge to support the staff. This is something that also I'm sure many individuals face, is you're going to deal with supervisors that, again, we're staying focused on the lazy part because there could be a lot of reasons behind this, but let's just kind of stay focused on the lazy part of it all, is the fact that they just don't want to take time out of whatever it is that they're not doing. I mean, to some extent, to engage in what could be a confrontation with an inmate in their effort to support the staff who, let's say, wrote the charge. So even though I say a supervisor that's afraid of conflict, I could also put a supervisor that's afraid of conflict or doesn't want to deal with conflict, which I think is what really focuses more on the lazy side of the coin. What's your thoughts on that, Joe? I mean, conflict, by the way, conflict can go both ways. We'll talk about the leadership down conflict, but for now, let's keep it as frontline inmate related, because I'm sure that's where the concern's coming from.
Yeah, in the dealing with supervisors afraid of conflict from the CO perspective, in their eyes, you got two supervisors. You got ones that are scary and ones that are go hard. To them, you're either handling up or you're not. Conflict comes with the job. It doesn't matter what level you're at. CO, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, there's going to be conflict. Two styles of leaders. You got the ones that promoted just for the title, and then you got the ones that promoted because they intend to provide leadership and, support. So, coming from a CO perspective, I totally understand because, I've seen it myself as a CO. You got them supervisors that would generally care enough to actually, go deal with a situation, or, ones that happen to come up, you're having a verbal conflict with an inmate and a supervisor just happens to be walking by and the supervisor says, hey, why are we even having this conversation? The rules, convict. Yes, sir. And it's over, or you got the supervisor that just walks by. In the CO's eyes, to them, it portrays laziness or that they're scared of conflict. And, in the grand scheme of things, regardless, you got to support your staff. Even if you stand there and don't say nothing, let them have that conversation. You're just there for the moral support. They just want to know that they have somebody in their corner.
Yeah. And guys, by the way, even when it comes to dealing with the inmate, yes, the supervisor is supposed to be objective because that could be the time when the inmate has to hear their concern, when the inmate gives them a chance to hear their concern, yes. So you want to be objective, I get it. But when an officer writes a good charge, it's going to document specifically, not just the violation, but specifically as to what happened, not the why, but, how it happened could be part of it, when it happened, where it happened. And it's very easy to do your due diligence beforehand to kind of see, okay, yeah, this is spot on, good charge, good report. I already kind of know what's in my mind when I go speak that inmate because I saw it all in front of me. And yes, unless I have a reason to mistrust my staff, am I giving staff a little bit of bias? Of course, because they're in supervisory roles. For anybody to say that, oh, you can't be biased towards your staff, then why would I put them in a supervisory role?
Exactly.
I am going to have a level of bias unless to be honest with you, there's a reason not to. So again, this guy gives me a legit report, or this officer gives me a legit report. I look at it, I read it, shit's on point, no need to question. Or if I did have a question, hey Joe, where did this happen, Joe? It's not in the report. Or hey Joe, you forgot to say when it happened. And I step away, I let them, they didn't change the report. They just added a little bit more details for me to review. So having said that, I'm specific. I got the knowledge I need. I go back to that inmate. To be honest with you, I know it may sound crazy. The why, that's where they tend to manipulate. And you got to really be careful of the whys these inmates will throw out to do whatever they can not to be held accountable. And at some point, if you're out of bounds and the officer did their job and they wrote it, and to be honest with you, the why, we could figure it out later when you go to court line, do whatever it is. But at this point, I'm supporting the officer because, again, they did their job. Because sometimes, I'll be honest with you, officers, yes. I mean, if there's time to determine the why, they can. But if the why becomes so hard to figure out, like you got two inmates fighting, it was like, why were they fighting? I don't know. We'll figure that out at court line. At this point, this is what I saw, and this is what I'm writing up. Whatever you guys want to do, you could take it up a court line. They could decide the why. They could decide through what evidence supports whose argument. Because at the end of the day, guys, you'll be there all day never writing a charge because every why is going to be survival for that person. This is why I had to do it. No, this is why. Hey, guys, you know what? I don't care. I don't care. My job is I saw you both fighting. I'm going to write it. I'm going to send it over to court line. What's your thoughts, Sergeant? I'm going to agree with you on that. I got you on camera fighting, blah, blah, blah. I'm not here to prove who's right or wrong. My officer did their job. They wrote the report. They did what they were supposed to do. Let's go ahead and fold up the court line. And that's where they have the time at that point to hear your argument and express it. Because at that point, I'm going to be honest with you. You're throwing out all these different things as to why. At the end of the day, let court line handle that. And again, that's always been advice that was given to me that I believe 100%. So you have supervisors that when your officer takes the time to write a report, write the charge, and it's dead on, and it's specific, and before you go see the inmate, you do your due diligence and check to make sure it's legit. Support your officer, support your staff member, and then let the court line. But for those that don't do it or don't even make the due diligence to see if what was said was correct, because you just don't, I don't have time for this. I don't want to deal with the conflict with this inmate. Yeah, but that's your job. You're the supervisor. That's what you're getting paid to do. That's why it's in policy and procedure for you to do that. Absolutely. So having said that, if you're not doing that part, because as a supervisor, here it is, your officer just had to deal with a conflict with that inmate and did what was expected of them, or the staff member did what was expected of them. They weren't afraid of conflict. They stepped up. They wrote a charge. They followed through. And then you selfishly as a supervisor say, well, I just don't feel like dealing with that today. Yeah, well, what about if the officer did the same thing then? Do we want a culture where because you as a supervisor don't want to deal with conflict that it just kind of translates to the officers? Because let me tell you something, or their staff members, that's all they do all day is deal with conflict. So if I had officers that say, well, I don't want to write that inmate for a charge because I just didn't want to deal with the conflict today, what would you do as a supervisor?
Exactly.
It's not a valid excuse either way. What's your thoughts on that before we get to the next one? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a clear-cut charge that's legitimate, it's backed by legitimate evidence such as video, or it's backed by legitimate evidence such as another eyewitness, just like you said, it happened, write it up, and put it through. Let disciplinary sort out the whys. The why doesn't matter. Why? Because he stole my commissary. Why? Because he took my seat in the day room. Why? It doesn't matter. You two were fighting. End of story. You got to back that staff. I've seen it time and time again where that happened. But if a supervisor is doing their due diligence, especially if for example, those two inmates that were fighting had a verbal altercation, 45 minutes to an hour ago, and you had to go down there. Well, I mean, you should have already separated these guys, number one, to make the boss's life a little bit easier. And, secondly is you never let something stew, especially when there's a chance that one of your staff members can get hurt because 20 years ago, our first reaction was to step in between these two fighting offenders and say, hey, break it up, and if the supervisor's not doing their due diligence, you got to think in the mind of, if I don't do my job, there's a real possibility that my staff might get hurt.
Yep. And guys, by the way, as I said, the tips all bleed in together. So, even though we're treating in an isolated fashion, we can easily see through experience that how they could easily connect, because they could. I mean, one thing could easily fall into the other. So usually you're not getting these things in isolation. You're getting these things collectively. But if we explain it in isolation, then maybe you could see how they also connect. And real quick, we talked about laziness, and I wanted to give another perspective from admin down, is we run on paperwork. So if we don't have paperwork and people are like, well, admin's not supporting me, the first thing we do is look at our supervisors and say, hey, I got nothing on this, and well, that day, okay, but they're coming at us saying we're not supportive when you haven't even given us any documentation that this was happening. So all of a sudden, we find out it's happening now, and everybody's mad at admin when you were the first person they told, and you didn't take care of it. And I'll guarantee you, because here's a funny thing too, a lot of generalized animosity happens when we don't believe or we don't have trust in management's exhausted effort, right? And I get that. It's like a no from someone I trust is okay because I trust them, but a no from someone I don't really know, I don't really trust, because remember, effort's not always seen, is questionable, because at that point, if I don't trust you, I want outcome. If I trust you, I'll accept exhausted effort, because again, effort's not always seen. So I'll guarantee you, sometimes when the supervisor, the first person to get the concern, doesn't put the effort behind it, because maybe because they're weak or whatever it is, because we'll get to that when it talks about talking to your staff upwards. But let's say because they're weak or they're lazy, whatever it is, when staff confront them, they may say, yeah, I told admin, they just don't care, or blah, blah, blah. And we actually don't know. So when they told admin, I as a frontline person, I would go back and say, hey, who did you speak to? So maybe I can talk to them, or, hey, do you have anything written that I could see, or whatever it is? I know you don't want to pull this card all the time. But again, if you don't have faith in the person's exhausted effort and you feel that something could still be done, you did exhaust your chain of command. I went to my sergeant. He told me he spoke to somebody. Okay, but I did still go to Joe. So Joe, if you don't mind, Joe, who did you speak to? Because I'm going to speak to him. No, you can't. Well, yeah, I can, because I came to you. I still have the concern. So I'm not violating chain of command by now asking you who you spoke to, so that I can go ahead and ask them. And I'll make sure that they knew that I spoke to you and you advised of what you could do. And at this point, I decided that I may need to go a level up, and, that at this point you weren't able to help me, and a good admin should understand that I have people that come to me all the time, not an effort to break chain of command, but an effort to go through the process. And then I'll even have the supervisor say, hey, Gange, I got such and such coming your way, because they may be right on this. I just don't think I'm in a position to solve it. What time you got for them? Whatever, just tell them to come up. There's no, when it comes to solving a problem, fuck your pride. Screw your ego. You don't need it. Just, hey, I can't solve it. I'm man enough to know I can't solve it. Let me make a phone call on your behalf and see if I can get you into the right hands. And a good manager will say, yeah, come on. Of course. I'm going down there today. Who is it? Who do I need to see personally? Because again, if you, Joe, you said something that was spot on. Sometimes it's just understanding their perspective. I have been able not to do something, but go back and tell that person why, and we're golden.
Yep.
We're golden. So that was spot on, Joe. I just wanted to reiterate that. You know what, Joe? Let's just go right into this one then. A supervisor that doesn't speak up for their staff, might as well continue into that. So what's your thoughts on that, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have to support your staff. You have to speak up for them, good or bad. It's your job to support your people. They're your people. You support them in front of the offender population, and you support them to your administration. We've all had the employee that is a workhorse, comes in, never calls in, does her job day in, day out, and they make one stupid mistake that requires a disciplinary. And, I've been that type of supervisor. I will go to whoever's heading up the hearing on that disciplinary, and I'll speak on their behalf. Say, hey, he made a dumb mistake. She made a dumb mistake. And, I'm here to tell you now, they're a jam up officer that just made a bad mistake on a bad day. You have to support your staff. You have to speak up for them when it's correct. You have to support them sometimes when they're not correct in front of the offender population, and you deal with that, separately, as in private, and say, hey, look, I had your back, but technically you were foul for this, and this is why. Either way, you have to support them. You have to support them. I mean, no ands, ifs, or buts. If you don't speak up for your staff, you start losing your loyalty. You start losing their motivation for you. There's a lot of things that can come into play when that happens.
Yeah. And guys, I want to mention something. Obviously, there's always should be a culture, a dynamic where there's trust, and it allows for people to speak their concerns to power. So truth to power, and then do their best to eliminate people from being disenfranchised, especially your supervisors. You don't want disenfranchised supervisors. And it goes both ways. I mean, management has to allow for those supervisors to voice their concerns because they know they're voicing their concerns on behalf of the people. But the front line also has to allow for effort to supersede outcome because, again, if that supervisor can't produce, it may not be because of them. And then those you could have high producing supervisors that now feel trapped, and then they just tend to give up because they're only being judged by the outcome and not by the effort, which is the one thing that's in their control. So now all of a sudden you got supervisors disenfranchised because they're failing, or they feel that they're failing, but they're trapped. There's nothing they can do. So it's great for frontline to say, hey, I just forgot to tell you, I know we didn't get this thing approved yesterday, but I know you brought it up. I just wanted to say thank you for that, because that's more than most have ever done for us. And the fact that you did that, to me, matters more than what the outcome was, because that's what I'm looking for in a supervisor. And what's good about okay.
And you said it right. I mean, you got to be approachable. You have to be approachable to your staff. And there's sometimes where, they bring things to you that's not within our realm of control. We absolutely have no control in that process, especially when it comes to personnel matters regarding your people. I had an employee that came to me and say, hey, look, my mom is sick with cancer. I drive an hour and a half every day one way to come to work. I need to get to a unit that's closer to me in my mom's house so I can, be with her. And, obviously that's something that's not within our control, but that's something I'm damn sure going to pick up the phone and contact the administration about, because I want to help that employee in every way, in any way I can, because, they're obviously trusting you enough to come to you with this personal matter, first off. And secondly, they're coming to you with the request because why? Because they trust you.
And guys, Joe, you know how spot on you are. I want to tell something real quick. Me and Joe just talked about 5 minutes before this was aired because the guy put a request in. Me and Joe got together, maybe thought of a few tips, and within 10 minutes, we're producing this. And for people that think that the quick tip videos, because they're convenient and efficient, it's not. It's the dialogue along the way, because we don't know where we're headed until I can understand Joe's perspective, he can understand mine, and we blend it. We allow for ourselves to interact in such a way that Joe's 25, 30 years, whatever he had, and my 20 years and change have now become 50 because we blended it. I know people are like, oh, we got 50 years of experience talking tape, but very isolated. But when we have dialogues at these tables, we blend them together. So, yeah, we truly have 50 years because we're blending what my perspective is with what Joe's perspective is. And somehow you just get this perspective that really, if you're intentional with this career and have the courage to try, you succeed, man. I mean, I'm thinking about this now. If somebody was telling me this during day one, how much better I would be the next day. And imagine if I keep doing this, how much better I'd be as my career progresses. I've been doing this for so long now, Joe, that I have bumped into people that have been watching me since they were an officer, and now they're admin.
That's awesome.
That's pretty fucking cool. But Joe, just to comment what you said, supervisors, I know sometimes you work in environments where you feel you're not heard. I'm going to say something on the back end of what we just said. You as a supervisor, because you're responsible for so many, you cannot allow yourself to ever get disenfranchised. You must remain persistent for your people, regardless of whatever the outcome is. because I'll be honest with you, eventually that persistence will be seen by your people, and that's where the love is. Because as a supervisor, there's no outcome that's ever going to be easy, but you can choose to keep doing the effort. And I'm going to tell you something, guys. I learned this too. Burnout. Everybody talks about burnout and just being overwhelmed with work. Burnout really actually has to do with being overwhelmed with work with no purpose. Let's not forget to add purpose, because when you're purposeful in your work and you have purpose, you have an end game, you don't get burned out. You just become more passionate. So what I'm saying is, some people may say, hey, well, Ganji, I'm just burned out because I keep on trying. Well, rediscover your purpose and keep on trying and you will not get burned out, because as it becomes more challenging, you become more reinforced. That's why heroes are heroes. When the times become more challenging, they stand up and they just keep fighting. So again, it's tough, but just remind yourself that it's worth it. And this is why. And again, the more specific you are with that why, the better it is for you to fight. Joe, I love this one too, Joe. You came up with this right at the last second. A supervisor that's ineffective at communicating. I mean, obviously by the way, and the reason why we put this under lazy or unmotivated is because being a better communicator is intentional growth, because you have to take your time with everybody to see how you can best communicate with them. Because again, you're a supervisor, you're dealing with different people. So each person requires a different approach. It's really true. So having your time to get to know them and how you can grow yourself to meet the needs of the people, that's very intentional. So, that one size fits all does not work in leadership. But what's your thoughts on that, Joe? Why was that so important to bring up?
Well, it was important to me because, the type of individual you are, not everybody's a great communicator. You may be policy smart, book smart, know the paperwork to a T, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're an effective communicator. Communication to me meant everything. You have to be an effective communicator, during your turnout topics. You have to be an effective communicator when you're training. You have to be an effective communicator when you're developing and culturing. You have to be a communicator. If you're ineffective, your staff will never know, and they will never know why. And to me, for them understanding a total picture of any scenario or the reasoning that we do things on a daily basis and the processes and as to how and why that happens that way, to me, it meant more to me to share that with them, because that gave them a bigger, broader picture of the overall process, and they began to understand things a lot better. Not to mention, if you're an effective communicator, they will come to you every time for any question that they have. And, that's what you want. You want them to come to you. You don't want them to go to another supervisor. You don't want them to go above your head to an administrator to get an answer for something that you could open your mouth and easily gave them. Communication to me in the penitentiary is probably, it was more important to me than any other topic. And in order to be effective and in order to have a shift that is well productive, higher morale, and, they have to have that communication. It's got to be two ways, and it damn sure can't be one-way communication from them to you and you're not saying nothing back.
Yeah. And Joe, I love what you're saying, because for me, when I look at communication, I also connect that to your ability to connect to your people. That's the truth. Communication is, if leadership is everything, then communication is the main tool.
Absolutely.
How you communicate truly does connect you to your people. And the funny thing is that's where it does become a level of investment in time. You can't connect to your people unless you're invested in them. You're not just spending time, you're investing time, right, Joe?
Yeah, and you got to be able to throw yourself out there. Even if you fall on your ass, throw yourself out there. I remember when I first promoted to sergeant, a sergeant and lieutenant handled all the shift briefings. So I let the lieutenant take the lead on the topics, and I would just kind of throw myself in there from time to time just to throw things out there. A, to base the reaction from the lieutenant to find out if they're going to allow me to have any input into my shift, and B, if the COs are receptive. And, being a sergeant is probably the founding blocks to find out where your communication skills are. But you have to be willing to put yourself out there. Now, once you become a lieutenant, hey, the spotlight's on you because they're looking to you. You're the total leadership for that shift. So they're looking to you for the absolute communication authority. And, but in order to do that, you have to put yourself out there. You have to be willing to do it.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, when I first crossed into leadership, I don't want to say, because you could be a leader at any level, but when I first crossed into supervisory roles, I did start picking up books on communication because I knew that was my number one responsibility, especially as a sergeant or as that immediate frontline supervisor. In case you're not in custody, your job is translating the needs of higher level and then the wants of the front line up. So, I mean, you are the translator. I mean, you're going to translate the strategy to the tactic to the strategy. So not having that ability to communicate and be invested, because also the other thing through that communication is, especially when you are communicating down, is to find some level of inspiration in regards to the work, however unique or routine. Your job is to translate some belief behind it all. And I also think, again, is it time consuming? Of course it is. And I feel that people that are ineffective at communicating, whether unmotivated or, get motivated, or whether you're just lazy, it's bad. It's truly bad, because that to me is probably the most important element of being a supervisor, is taking advantage of your ability to utilize the spoken word. For me, I'm a writer. I look at the spoken word as a painting. I'm not the best drawer in the world, but I could write and I could put something into it. I mean, I've written things where at the end I get misty eyed, because it's moving me. And that's something where, like, well, Gangi, is that weak? No, guys, that's powerful. I want to share it that way. Like Joe said, put yourself out there. I agree with that 100%. People respect vulnerability, and then it allows them to be vulnerable. So having said that, the more passionate you are, even if it leaks out, the emotion is read. People read off it, So I think communication, to me, is, if you could just spend every day learning something different about communicating, and most of the time it comes from talking to the people in front of you and see what they relate to. I mean, there's some people that you could tell. Some people are connected to feelings, so they use a lot of words in how they communicate that relate to feelings. Then you get some people that relate to visuals, and they use a lot of words in their language that relates to visuals, like, look, or whatever it is. And then same thing with people that need to hear it. So even by listening to how they communicate, you could determine what is the best way for them to receive it. I've talked to officers that want to feel, so I use words that relate to emotion and feeling, and to keep them motivated. And then there's people that kind of have to see things. That's how they move forward. So I change the dialogue and try to focus on stuff that's more visual, as I speak. Like, hey, picture a map, and we're over here, we're over there. But again, that's intentional effort. And key thing is, that's not spending time, that's investment of time. So most of the time when you have a supervisor and a frontline person not on the same page, it really doesn't have to deal with the message in regards to what the context is. It's more of the delivery of the message. An expert communicator can deliver a message to anyone as long as they understand the person they're delivering it to. I mean, that's the key. So again, some people get so tied up in the message, where it's really more about the delivery. And that is something that's intentional in your effort to discover what's the best way to deliver the message to, let's say, Joe or Gangi, because Gangi's this way and Joe's this way. And I could tell Joe it this way, and I go tell Gangi, and Gangi's not buying into it. But if I tell it this way, then Gangi buys into it, and then Joe does it. Okay, well, then do it differently for each one. But the point is, the context stays the same, but your delivery should match the individual if you know them. And again, that's effort at knowing your people, which we should be doing every day. Walk and talk, sort of. Hey, Joe, we also mentioned these last 2 points that we're going to talk about are they do matter. They're not isolated. They blend in. But when we kind of talk about it, you're going to think that they're in conflict, but they're not. One is no policy and procedure, and one is about discretion. So granted, they're not in conflict with each other. Actually, they're a heightened partnership because ultimately, when you, as a supervisor, utilize discretion, you're trying to bring it back to where policy and procedure can connect to it. But let's just do this. A supervisor that just doesn't take the time out of their day to constantly keep themselves updated on policy and procedure. What's your thoughts on a supervisor that just doesn't know policy and procedure?
A supervisor that doesn't know policy and procedure, got promoted, they were set up for failure from the get-go. Because the first thing you want to know is, do these people know policy and procedure? And secondly, are they going to apply that policy and procedure correctly? Policy and procedure to me, was the Bible. If it's in black and white, it's there. It will protect you every time. It will cover you. It will cover your staff. If you don't know policy and procedure, how in the hell are you going to be able to communicate with your staff and advise them on how to do their jobs if you don't even know what the policy and procedures is? Because, policies and procedures aren't there just for you to apply. It's there for you to cover your staff with, to keep them safe, to keep them knowledgeable, to keep them out of harm's way. It's an ultimate, to me, it was the holy grail. And I still use it to this day. And I still have officers that call me to this day because they knew I knew the policy and procedure and I wasn't going to steer them wrong. And that's what you want. You want to be so knowledgeable in policy and procedure that an officer, who is unsure of themselves will come to you and ask, hey, if I do this, am I inbounds or out of bounds? It's your job to keep them in bounds, and you have to know the policy and procedures in order to do that. You cannot be an effective leader if you do not know the policy and procedures. You're not doing yourself any justice, and you're damn sure not doing your staff any justice.
Yeah, what's funny, as we talk about supervisors having your staff back, I don't know if Facebook kind of listens, but this video pops up on my feed. I want to show it, but if this doesn't explain everything we're talking about in a quick 5-second video, this is what a supervisor is supposed to do for their staff. So I'm gonna zoom in on myself real quick, so make sure we can see this. It may be hard, but I guess you can kind of see it. So you see, you have a basketball player there, Joe. Do you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, watch this, guys. See what his partner just did?
Yep.
The player had his head down, and his partner was quick to lift his head up. I think that's. I mean, that's what leaders do. That's what supervisors automatically should be doing. But you're right. When it comes to policy and procedure, that is the foundation that we build from. So having said that, it's a starting point. It really is. If you don't have that as a foundation, then you have no way of utilizing discretion. You just don't. That's why I always tell rookies to kind of go by the book at first, because again, you're going to develop discretion later on, but it has to come from a good foundation of knowing what your job is. Because if you don't know what your job is, where you're headed, exactly. Discretion really is a destination sort of, but where you're headed, I'm headed here. I have an end game, so the end game is usually the landing point of what policy and procedure is. So if you're a supervisor and you don't know policy and procedure, besides the inmates knowing it all, and hopefully your front line on point, you're really ineffective. Now, mind you, I'm not telling you that your effort to know policy and procedure is to go around and testing everyone and micromanaging everyone. It's not. It's just enough to have confidence in solving issues when they come your way. But it sure as hell is not going to be used to micromanage the shit out of your people and then just kind of, oh, nope, what does policy say? What does policy say? Don't do that all day either, because that doesn't give your employees the chance to kind of take calculated risk, if you will. I know it's corrections and people don't like the word risk, but we are innovative guys, and we're dealing with inmates that put us in positions where policy and procedure doesn't cover it. So you are going to need staff that are willing to make decisions that may go outside of policy, not violate policy, or maybe outside of procedure, because policy is the end result. Outside of procedure to bring things back in line with policy. So, if you're knowing policy and procedure to the point where that becomes your backbone, That's too much. So there's a balance where you know it so you could be effective. That's the key. You know it enough so you could be effective. But having said that, you also know it enough to guide your people through some choices that they need to make. So I love supervisors that if I had to make a decision, they would ask me, well, what do you like to do? And then you would go ahead and they say, well, that would work. That's in compliance with eventually getting us to A, B, C, D. So I'm good with it. Or if it wasn't, it'd be like, well, policy says through procedure, it should be done this way. So now let me ask you again, with that in your mind, how do you want to get to that knowing this? Okay. And then it just gives a level of freedom within the parameters of what's defined. But yeah, again, and you have to agree with this, Joe, there is, and guys, take this for what it is, please. I never once said violate, but we have to know for a fact that not everything is covered in policy and procedure. And we might as well get to the next spot. Decisions are going to have to be made in an effort to bring us back. And if you're a supervisor that's so defined by policy and procedure, you're going to get overwhelmed because you're going to realize not everything is covered. And right now, your ability to rely on policy and procedure for your backbone because you're so afraid to make a decision has now hampered you because now you're frozen and now your staff is frozen. So somewhere along the line, while learning policy and procedure, while understanding policy and procedure, again, procedure is the route you get to the end game of what policies express. You have to also understand there's a level of discretion there that may have to be balanced sometimes where things aren't as always black and white as we would like them to be, right? So, Joe, when you see a supervisor who is indecisive, I usually feel sometimes that they're indecisive because they're at a point right now where they can't find it in policy.
Yeah, every newly promoted supervisor, no matter what realm that you're at, there's some level of indecisiveness. Why? Because you're getting your feet wet in a new position. You're learning where your authority tree is. You're learning where your authority boundaries are. Every facility is different. There's always going to be some level of indecisiveness at first, and that's fine. But that's where the people above you, should come to you and say, hey, look, this is what policy says this, and this is what you're going to do. And, as long as we're not violating policy, I'm good with it. So from that point, the supervisor should be willing to make a decision regarding something that's not necessarily in black and white, or covered by any kind of unit procedures, but still achieves the ultimate goal without showing any kind of indecisiveness in front of your staff. That's the main thing. And there's sometimes where you come across situations and you look at your COs and go, you know what? I've never had to deal with this. I just honestly don't freaking know. So that's when you pick up your phone and you call your next level up, but for daily operations and daily things, I always strive for making the decision, knowing that it's within policy and procedures. And then I'll let my uppers know the following day, especially if you're like a night shift supervisor, you can let them know via email. And then when they come in and say, hey, look, we caught these two offenders fist fighting. I watched the video. It looks like one of them was actually trying to just defend himself. So I locked this one up. I got them both medically screened, and I just moved the less aggressor to a different area. Yeah. And that's the type of supervisor you want to be. That's the type of supervisor that you want to strive to be, because you want to be able to make those decisions and deal with those situations, because that's what prepares you for the next step. Not every and I'll just call him Danny. I had a captain named Danny. And I remember when I first made lieutenant, I was on night shift and made a couple of decisions. And, I thought it was my job to call him just to cover my ass, And babe, let me tell you, when you wake somebody up at 2 a.m. for a simple process that you made a decision on, that phone conversation was not pleasant, but he justified himself the next morning when he came in and he said, look, Lieutenant, you don't have to call me for everything. If it's something major, we're having a riot, we have an escape, we have, a homicide or a suicide, yes, I expect you to pick up that phone and call me. But over simple fights, I don't need a phone call at 2:00 in the morning saying you locked two up. Lock their asses up and leave me an email from here on in. As long as I know you follow policy and procedure, and I got no doubt that you're handling your business. So handle your business. Yes, sir. And that stuck with me forever. So you strive to train those below you to be that type of supervisor and say, hey, look, the policy and procedure. And I did this to my sergeants. And I've had sergeants that were promoted to me from the street with no correctional experience. Ex-police officer who's never been in a correctional setting was promoted to a sergeant and placed under me. And within a year and a half, he was promoted to lieutenant, because my job was to teach him and give him the ability to make decisions. He would come to me with, hey, Lou, this is what we got going on. Okay, Sergeant, what are you going to do? How are you going to handle that? And invoke his thinking process, give him the tools of knowing the policy and procedure. And once he understands it, the way I justify locking somebody up versus the way somebody else justify locking somebody up, maybe two different styles, but the end result is still the same. We followed policy and procedure. And I wanted him to understand that I want him to make those decisions, because I may be bowed up doing something and he can handle the minor issues and make the decision. Let me know what you did later. And if the uppers don't like it, I got your back.
Right. And guys, I want to mention something. As you move up, obviously there's going to be discretion at every level across every department. I mean, it's just corrections. You're dealing with human behavior, and to sit there and say that everything's defined by policy and procedure, I mean, I disagree. We're evolving every day, and then something may have to get put in the policy because of something new that happened. I mean, it happened to me the other day. I mean, I get it, but definitely I will say one thing. As a supervisor, because people rely on you more, your use of discretion becomes greater. Because again, you're there to alleviate ambiguity. So granted, we're not in a position also to freeze during decision making, because someone's waiting for that response and they're buying time, regardless of, you may think that the further you are removed from an incident, that it's safe for you to kind of take your time. It's not, because there is someone who needs the answer to that. There is somebody that's waiting. So for me, I always feel that when it comes to making a decision, very general, guys, but feel how this could apply to you. But it's going to be general, but trust me, I know what I'm going to say is going to make sense. I have to make sure that why I take the time to think of something long-term, let me give them something short-term for now, but not forget that I still got to get to it at a longer moment. And I still got to get to it at a more longer-term decision. But sometimes people get so hung up on waiting for that final solution, which it probably never is going to be one, that they fail to maybe help the person on the floor put a little Band-Aid for a second, but not in an effort to keep the Band-Aid there. So that I want to put the balance there too. But you know what? Let me be respectful. Joe's running around right now. This issue is a lot. It's complicated. I mean, a lot of people, different perspectives on this. But I don't want to keep Joe waiting. So do me a favor. Tell Joe to put a Band-Aid on it for 2 seconds. This is what he could do. But tell him I did not forget about him. I will get right back, because I know this isn't enough. But let me just, out of respect, give Joe something, and let me go talk to my people immediately, because at this point, I want to solve the issue long-term, but I don't want to leave Joe waiting while I'm trying to figure out what that solution is going to be. So there's a respect. But remember, if you are indecisive as a supervisor, or anything that requires action, somebody's waiting for that response, and it becomes disrespectful if you freeze in such a manner where there's no effort to help the person who is now struggling to get past something. I mean, I just think it's something where, and sometimes, guys, I'll be honest with you, I've dealt with it. For people that are afraid to make a decision, I want to give it from another perspective. You need to have an environment of trust. If you don't have an environment of trust, where you don't look at the motive behind a decision. You are quick to punish everyone. And that's on you now when people don't want to make decisions, because for you, someone that people are getting judged by the outcome as opposed to the intent. And that's going to be a problem because, I got to make a decision. I don't, this is what I want to do, but I don't think management has my back because they only care about the outcome. So I freeze. And it's not because they freeze because they're afraid to make a decision. They freeze because they're afraid to get in trouble. And that's two different reasons. Don't blend those in. Those are two different reasons. Someone afraid of getting in trouble does not equate to someone that's afraid to make a decision. Someone that's afraid to get in trouble, that's a management's turn now to look at it. That's us. We fucked up. Up. Someone that's afraid to make a decision, that's on them, because I have an environment where I look to cultivate. I ask them why, and I try to understand their perspective. And if their why is a good why and it makes sense, then I take the heat because maybe there's something I didn't provide in policy that would help for that situation. So guess what, Joe? Great decision making. I apologize. I messed up. There wasn't enough in that policy there, but you stepped up. Hey, can we readdress this and let's figure out what we need to do based on what happened to you? So you see, this is always about teamwork. It is. But if you notice, look at the two different perspectives. One is it's on them, the indecisiveness, or I'm afraid to get in trouble. That's on me now. That's on me. What have I done that froze that guy? Well, you know what happened, Gange? Last time, there was a guy that made a decision based on good intent who was just charged as if he made no decision, as if he was negligent, as if he was lazy. And the problem is now that person who was a go-getter, who was a level 10 leader, someone that you want to support, did not feel supported. His intent was correct, just the action wasn't what we wanted. But having said that, to be honest with you guys, unless it's a natural consequence, we don't know all the time the variables that could affect something is. But the thing is, I've learned for the most part, action is better than inaction because it starts to pull us into a proactive manner. So having said that, the person doesn't take an action now because you treated them as if, like when they made a decision last time, as if they did nothing or as if they didn't care. And now the person's like, hey, listen, I'm going to get in trouble no matter what I do. So at this point here, I think it's safer for me not to take the risk. I mean, I've seen it, guys. I've seen people maybe act impulsively. And the first thing I'm like is, you know what? This is what I do. And I believe most good leaders do this. We have staff that take this position to do good, to serve others, whether it's their brother and sister, whether it's an inmate. Their job is they feel that there's a greater good behind what they do. They are first responders in whatever it is that they do. And let's say for custody, someone's getting assaulted, someone's getting hurt. There may be something in me that's impulsive that wants to respond to that because that's what guided me into this profession. Because we tell people in the academy, you got to have heart. You got to run. You got to run to these things. And the people that are attracted to that are usually the ones that would do that. But then sometimes they have to realize that there's also a balance to that. And we have to figure out how to cultivate that from the get-go because it's like, yeah, we want courage, but we also want it to be balanced with some level of caution. But sometimes that's not expressed. And then what happens here, someone does something impulsively on good intent, but they get judged as if they were foolish and stupid. And I think what happens here is I look back at management and say, hey, hold on, can I ask you a question? We knew these type of heroes that got hired. We know that some of them are going to be impulsive because sometimes they become myopic, like Joe said, and their need to save a life becomes paramount. So having said that, a lot of what's inside them takes over, which is what we call heart. Heart can take over logic, 100%. So I would ask myself as management, have we done anything to mitigate that? Like you don't want the officer to go into the cell only when he has backup, but why does that officer have the key? Why can't we give it to the backup? So I say sometimes we have to always be wary of the impulses and what we could do to mitigate that so we can make sure that we minimize or hopefully help staff through that impulse, where that impulse can now make it more dangerous. But again, the intent is what matters. And when you have staff that are afraid to make a decision, good staff that's afraid to make the decision, they're not being judged on their intent. They're not even being asked why they made the decision. They're being judged just on the outcome. And eventually what's going to happen is you're going to disenfranchise them, and they are going to become the staff member that you're cultivating them to, which is someone that doesn't want to make decisions, because at the end of the day, no one cares why they did it. Joe, spot on dialogue today, man. Spot on. Joe, any closing thoughts to round this? I mean, this was a great dialogue. I thought it was.
Yeah, I mean, for the frontline supervisors, be somebody that your staff can trust. Be somebody that your staff can look at and come to you for questions, answers. Don't be the indecisive. Don't be the unmotivated. We all have, personal conflicts in our personal lives that sometimes play a role in the way we act on certain days. But don't be like that every day. Take your lumps. Do what you need to do to lead your staff. And from the CO side, let me emphasize one thing in closing to you guys. There's been days where I wasn't on my game quite a few times. And, I've had them COs that had that level of trust in me, had that level of loyalty in me, and that I've had that level of trust to them, were able to come to me and say, "Hey, Lou, you're not with it today. What the hell? We need to get this together, or we're going to start losing people." Don't be afraid to speak up. Lieutenants suffer from separation and disconnect sometimes just as much as the COs do. And all it takes is one person to step into a private office and say, "Hey, man, I notice you're not on your game. This ain't like you. You okay?" Sometimes there's underlying issues and sometimes there's not. So, be proactive in your approach. Be proactive in supporting your staff. It doesn't matter from lieutenant to CO or CO to lieutenant. The trust, the loyalty, the proactivity, the decisiveness, it all blends both ways. But the key is communication. Have that communication. If you don't have communication, you're not going to have anything else. And, once again, you guys are out there walking the beats, doing the things on a daily basis for 16 hours a day sometimes, giving up your off days for mandatory overtime. And I want to tell you that I got much love, much respect for all of you. And my hat's off to you guys. Be safe and, take care of each other.
Yeah. And guys, what I loved about this dialogue is we kind of covered a couple of reasons of why something may not produce the desired result, or why someone would not want to produce the desired result. I think it was good about it is not to automatically assume the person's lazy. But we did address that as well. But I think the key here is understanding why. But I think we also, besides giving direction to the front line as some steps that they can do, we also put some stuff back on the supervisors to kind of look at themselves, be self-aware. What kind of message are you carrying to your people? Because at the end of the day, they are a reflection of you.
Absolutely.
So if you put your feet up on the desk while an inmate's around you, and then you want to yell at an officer for having his hands in his pocket when he's talking to an inmate, well, he learned it from you. You have to lead by example. Hey, Joe, you have a comment on Facebook. I was just curious. It says coffee, fresh air, sunlight, and 9 inches. Yes, sir.
No, 9-inch nails. Read better. 9-inch nails.
Sorry, I need my glasses.
They said if you did that enough, you'd go blind, Gangi. There you go. You're blind.
All right, I'm going to get the show. Hey, Joe, this was a phenomenal show, Joe. I hope you have a safe day at work, my brother. If you need anything, call me. Maybe we'll do something on the back end of tonight or tomorrow. Maybe a live coming up.
Absolutely.
All right, brother. And to the person that requested it, look at that. You requested it, what, 2 hours ago? Joe hopped on a busy day. He's got to go to work still, but wanted to get this information out. And what's cool about this, guys, this information is fucking evergreen. It goes up there, and it's there for you whenever you need it. Love you, Joe, man. And I'll see you guys later.
Brother.
Later, bro. Hey, Joe, 9 inches. That means I can't be there today. I'll see you.